This thing I'm standing in front of right here is my 1989 Rockwood pop-up camper that I bought last year and basically patched it up in order to be able to use it. I took it on a couple of short camping trips and it performed more or less as designed, which isn't saying a whole lot. But there are some issues with the water and the propane system that I'm just not willing to live with. So I'm fixing them. This is not rocket science. It should have been an easy project. But as usual, there's at least a couple of gotchas that managed to show up. Stick around and see how it turned out. Hi, I'm Gary. I make videos about technology and do-it-yourself projects that happen to me. I generally don't go looking for things to make videos about. They just come along and make my retirement interesting. This video is about a project I wasn't actually wanting to do. Last year I bought a 36-year-old Rockwood pop-up camper with the intention of fixing it up just enough to make it usable. It mostly involved a lot of canvas stitching and patching, rewiring, repairing some damaged bits, and repainting a really ugly interior. You can watch that video here, and I thought the result was okay for a month of work. Then I went camping with it, twice, and my resolve to not do any upgrades to it went in the ditch for two reasons. The first one involved cooking, and the second one was disaster prevention. I'll explain that in a minute. First, the cooking. The camper had no stove. I'm a one-pot cook anyway, so I used my little one-burner butane stove, which worked just fine. But having only one burner turns out to be really limiting if you want to make coffee or boil water or anything else while you're cooking. And this camper actually has a propane system, although there were no appliances to connect to it. It's piped in to two locations inside, with a quick connect behind the kitchen counter and another one in the bench seat, which was apparently intended for an also non-existent outside stove. So after those two trips, I found a 2-burner drop-in stove on Marketplace and installed it. Getting it installed was actually easy. First, you mark the opening and cut a giant hole in the countertop. Of course, it doesn't fit the first time, so you keep trimming it until the stove drops into place. Then you screw it down so it doesn't fall out when the kitchen cabinet is turned over for travel. It came with a cover that also serves as a windscreen, and that has to be screwed down also. That just leaves hooking up the propane, and this is where it went wrong. The stove came with a hose with a male disconnect on the end, and I assumed it would plug into the female disconnect behind the cabinet. Indeed, it did plug in, but the gas simply would not flow. I replaced the ancient regulator and hose on the propane bottle, redid all the connections, checked the stove itself, all to no result. Still no propane. It left me so frustrated, I abandoned the project for several months until camping season was coming around again. To make a long story a bit shorter, the problem turned out to be the quick disconnect. There's a check valve inside it, with a little plunger that has to be depressed by the male connector. And the one on the stove hose was apparently not quite long enough to do that. It seems the design of these connectors changed slightly in 30-something years. Fortunately, the female connector was just screwed on, and a replacement one from Temu did mate perfectly with the stove hose. So now the stove actually gets propane, it lights, and operates like it's supposed to. And I have 2 burners for cooking instead of just one. You could argue that this mod was really just for convenience, but the second one didn't leave me much of a choice. The camper came with a 10-gallon water tank and a sink with a faucet that's really a hand pump. It draws water from the tank as long as you pump it, and the water stops as soon as you stop pumping. By the way, I enlisted my grandson as my assistant for much of this video, which made it much easier to do the camera work. This faucet makes it a little awkward to wash your hands because you have to pump with one hand the whole time. It also isn't tall enough to get a big container under it. But it was usable and I would have left it alone, except for the disaster part. As I mentioned, the entire kitchen cabinet has to be folded over and lowered to the floor for travel. Otherwise, you can't close the pop top. When you do this, the faucet is now down at floor level, effectively lower than the water tank. Whether by design or the age of the pump allows water to flow through it, and the entire contents of the tank then siphons out onto the floor. Runs under the cabinets and out every crevice in the camper, which is certainly not the end of the world as we know it, but still a minor disaster for the camper. I did make an attempt at avoiding the problem by clamping a piece of tubing on the end of the faucet for travel, but this rather obvious kludge was more of a nuisance than a solution. I couldn't find a hand pump that would fit the countertop opening, so I decided to install a regular RV water pump and a standard faucet instead. This will solve the convenience problems in addition to hopefully preventing future flooding. Once again, I found a pump on Marketplace, but when I got around to testing it in my shop to see if it actually worked, it ran for less than a minute, very noisily, and quit. So it was off to Amazon for a new pump. The new one passed the test just fine, and it's much quieter than the old one. Now all we had to do is install it, right? But we also needed a new faucet, because the old one doesn't work with an external pump. The new one needed to be either very short or foldable. And this foldable one should be the perfect solution. Fortunately, there's a large empty space in the compartment with the water tank, so we can mount the pump there and run a new water line to the faucet location at the sink. The old tubing's not usable for the outlet because the pump will pressurize it to 45 psi, and it's not rated for that. The old faucet/pump is only held in by 4 screws, so it comes out easily enough, but removing it uncovers the biggest complication in this project. The hole it left in the countertop is much larger than a standard faucet, and it's an odd size and shape. A mounting plate's obviously needed to cover this hole, so I 3D printed one, which is a story in itself that I'll probably make a short video about soon. Now we drill new holes in the countertop, fasten down the mounting plate, and screw down the new faucet with the mounting nut that came with it. Then we fold over the kitchen and lay out the hose to verify it reaches to the pump location, which is going to be on the cabinet wall near the water tank. This wall, as is typical for RVs, is very thin plywood. So I really needed a backing plate on the other side of it to stiffen it, because the pump is heavy and it vibrates. This little bit is where the job turned to comedy, because the backing plate is inside the cabinet, which is only accessible through a very small door. And I did a dumb thing by pre-drilling screw holes in it, which means one of us had to line up the screw holes blindly, while the other one held the pump in place and tried to get the mounting screws in. That did not work. After multiple failed attempts, I did what I should have done in the first place and re-drilled the holes with the backing plate in place, which finally let us get the pump mounted and hook up the outlet hose. That completed the pressurized part of the system. The inlet hose barb that came with the pump is larger than the one on the water tank outlet, of course. This would have meant using 2 different sizes of tubing joined by a fitting in the middle. That's what I originally intended. But fortunately, the old pump I bought earlier came with a piece of tubing the right size for the tank, with a fitting that screwed directly onto the pump inlet, which was a lot simpler. Since the pump is now electric, it needs an on-off switch. There was an old switch already mounted on the kitchen cabinet for some unknown use, which I tested and then hooked up to electrical ground, the pump itself, and the fuse panel I installed last year. It takes 3 wires for this particular switch because it includes an LED to show when it's on. With the whole system now hooked up, the only thing left is to test it by actually putting water in the water tank. The pump needs 12-volt power, and my power source for the camper is my portable power station because it's easily removable and it avoids the hassle of maintaining a battery outside in our fairly severe winters. So we plug the trailer power connector in, turn on the pump switch, and try the faucet. And this is the other unintentionally comic bit in this video. When I tested the pump switch, I carefully marked the terminals so I would know which was which when I was hooking it up almost blind inside the cabinet, and I apparently marked them backwards because the LED was always lit and the pump would not run. But after swapping the terminals, we repeated the test and verified that indeed the system does work, if you get it hooked up right. The pump turns on and off with the switch and the faucet as designed, and there don't seem to be any obvious water leaks. The installation still leaves most of that cabinet clear for storage. So I declared the upgrade a success and set out to make this video, which I hope you enjoyed, or at least got some amusement out of the things that went wrong. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so.